3, 2, 1.
What's up, everyone? Dan here, Crypto Capital Venture, August 11th, 2018. I hope you're doing well. It's Saturday. Enjoy your weekend. Today's video is brought to you by this week's Hater of the Week, OmniSpace Gaming, who says yesterday, in a comment yesterday, as usual, always wrong. Now it's time to buy. Dan, you're my best indicator. When you're bullish, I sell. When you're bearish, I buy. Thanks for the free money, pal. OmniSpace Gaming. I don't think he watches many of our videos. So usually I call out these haters of the week because they provide great segue, great context to the video that I'm about to do. And in this video, I'm going to start with visiting a video I did July 30th. Let's take a look. If we're right now forming just a lower high on the long term and we're going lower, what are some things? So one thing I noticed was interesting is basically a possible reverse head and shoulders on the weekly, which really gives you a shoulder there. We have our head here, that previous bottom. And right now we're at this critical time where we're just kind of like, well, are we going to break out? But what if we don't? What if we don't have that breakout? What if we don't have new highs happening in the short term? Well, on the downside, we might have a bounce back down. We could have, a pretty dark couple weeks or so, but that dark period could set us up nicely for a reverse head and shoulders on the weekly. So that was around 2 weeks ago, trading 25% higher than we are right now at around $8,100 Bitcoin. And now we're at a $6,300 Bitcoin. And you can see that reverse head and shoulders that we were starting to track on the downside, right? We always anticipate upside and anticipate downside. That reverse head and shoulders on the weekly right now is in play, and you can see it on the charts. And this is really what I wanted to talk about in this video, because these moves in Bitcoin, if you zoom out on the weekly chart, it's not a new story for anybody if you've been around for a while. So to anticipate something like this isn't, it's not like it's rocket science. It's nothing amazing. So when we anticipated this possible inverse head and shoulders, which may or may not hold, we did it because it is a good indicator to possibly accumulate a new dip. Not saying that we won't see resistance on a possible bounce, but right now in terms of where Bitcoin is, it could potentially be a nice time to accumulate. But you want to analyze your own portfolio, your own unique risk tolerance that you have, and make that decision. Nobody can make that decision for you. But right now on the weekly, you see the inverse head and shoulders possibly in play. So we have this left shoulder, we have this head, and then we have now, we have actually some upward momentum within like the last hour. I think Bitcoin's up like a few $100s. And you can see this wick on the weekly. We have some bulls stepping in a little bit. We need this to continue for a couple days for anything significant to happen. But it's a good first step, right? Especially on the weekly. So you see this wick down to form possibly a right shoulder, and we'll get a right shoulder bounce. So to dig into this a little bit, we can look at the daily chart, and from a daily perspective, we have the shoulder, we have this head, and now we have this possible right shoulder right here. So when we did that inverse head and shoulders on the weekly, we were trading right around here, $81, just above the 200 EMA. So we basically said if we're going to see a bounce through this upper trend line, right? Because that's what we were looking for on the upside. That's what our anticipation was for the upside. It's going to be because this 200 EMA finally showed support for Bitcoin, which it has not done in this downtrend, right? We broke support here, we broke support here, and we needed support to get that bounce through, and we didn't get it. So if we weren't going to get it, what was going to happen? Well, we were probably going to form this new lower high, which is what we were talking about for the last few weeks. Basically coming off this previous bottom in July, going up, we were talking about potentially forming a new lower high in Bitcoin, which we did. But we also talked about how a lower high here could be short-term bearish, right? It's potentially short-term not good. So what I mean by that is we are down 25% since that lower high. However, in the long term, and this is what leads us and circles us back around to that inverse head and shoulders, is in the long term, this could be an extremely bullish setup, right? So because in longer term downtrends, oftentimes what you will see is a bottom which is formed by a weekly inverse head and shoulders. And you can see, this may or may not happen, but if we do bounce out of here and finally bounce up through this trend line, you'll see that this head was the bottom of Bitcoin in this downtrend. Not saying that's going to happen, but it's something to anticipate. And either way, we've anticipated a 25% pullback quite well. So what's in favor of Bitcoin right now? Besides the inverse head and shoulders on the weekly, possibly setting up, we have the daily stock RSI. You can check that out right now. Two things happening. On the daily stock RSI, we were trading really oversold for a good amount of time. Basically the 1st to, I guess, the 8th, around a week, extremely oversold on the stock RSI. And it doesn't hang out there that long, that often. And you can see that on the stock RSI. So if we zoom out of there and we kind of go over to the RSI, something I want to point out as well is this bounce that we got off of this area right here. So this 30 area, you can notice on the RSI for Bitcoin on the daily, we haven't traded below this 30 area for very long. Back in, let me move this. When was this? We came down back in mid-June very briefly. Obviously, a critical area for us on this channel that we talk about a lot is the 40 line on the RSI. So we don't want to stay below the 40 on the RSI for very long. And you can see we've spent a good amount of time this year below the 40. And that's very indicative of this bear market we've been in. So right now what I'm looking at in terms of are we actually going to form a reverse head and shoulders on the weekly is we're very oversold on the stock RSI. We have a little bit of upward momentum right now, Saturday, August 11th. The question is, are we going to break above this 40 on the RSI? So right where we are right now, are we going to see resistance or are we going to see upward pressure? Are the bulls going to step in? Are we going to see some volume to really get us back above this area? And when we're back above this area, oftentimes what you will see is we'll start forming that new run, right? A new uptrend to possibly break previous highs. So you can see that most previous one ended up being a lower high because we didn't break this neckline, but we want to see these moves on the RSI, these nice upward trends of momentum. So that's kind of what we're looking for at this point in terms of where we are in the oscillators, and the indicators are looking nice in terms of that. So one thing to anticipate is a possible area of support for Bitcoin right now, and a possible setup for this right shoulder. But one thing to anticipate in telling that story is a little bit of sideways trading, right? We see it often, like a 5 to 10% channel or so in Bitcoin. So when it's forming a top or a bottom, and to really paint that picture, you can really take any top or bottom that we've had in these lower highs, or these lows that we've had. And you can see these little channels, 5 to 10% channels, and we trade sideways for a little bit of time. Right now, you can anticipate something like that happening, right? So we could be setting up a nice area of support, a nice bottom to bounce off of. And from there, what you'd want to look for and anticipate, at least on the upside, would be, a couple things. Obviously, we want to see what happens at this neckline. We can get a nice confirmation of a breakout if we make a run to that neckline and break it. And then if you really want to track that inverse head and shoulders on the weekly, what you would look for is really the distance from the bottom of that head right there. And let me get a line here so we can do this. So basically, like the distance from the bottom of that head to the neckline, and wherever we break out, you want to measure that distance. And that's the target, right? So say we break out, the 3rd week of August, right around there, we break out of that neckline. Our target would be just over $11,000. And that would really help confirm a bottom in Bitcoin. And this is not a prediction. I'm just giving you an indicator, something to look out for on the upside, right? Just over 11,000. In that happening, a couple things could happen. We might see resistance at this neckline, and we might form another lower high and then a bounce down. And actually, this whole reverse head and shoulders might be broken. Another thing that could happen is we could break the neckline. We could come up a little bit, see some resistance, and then we can come back down and retest this neckline as support. That would be bullish if we see support at the neckline for a bounce off of there. So this is something that can lead us into fall time, right? This isn't something that's going to happen in the next week or two. This is something we have to track. But I really wanted to bring it up because, you know, I get comments like this all the time. Dan, you're always wrong. But I want to say, because I do want to defend the channel and what we talk about, we anticipate the upside and the downside. And in anticipating this downside, I think we've done very well. We've had some really nice anticipations lately. And I don't use the word predictions because I don't throw predictions out there, but I give you something to look out for because it's what I'm looking out for. It's what I'm sitting back. It's why I started this channel. It's why I do TA. And if you're not a fan of technical analysis, this is why it works. This is why it's important, because you're always mentally prepared for the upside and downside. You're always mentally prepared. If you were watching that live stream, you were prepared for a 25% dip in the market to maybe possibly form this reverse head and shoulders. And you know, that's really why I started this channel, is to be prepared so we can utilize wisdom, make the best decisions, increase our portfolio safely with as minimal risk as possible. Obviously not without risk, because this is an incredibly volatile market, but that's why we started the channel. I really appreciate you coming by. Let me know your thoughts about this inverse head and shoulders, possibly on the weekly. I'm curious to know if you think it might form. If you're accumulating now, if you think we're going lower, let me know. I would love to know your thoughts. Thank you so much for coming by. I appreciate you. I will see you in the next video, and God bless.